reason we invited Dr. Merriman here is that he's a representative of a new company created by Craig Venter and that great futurist Peter Diamandis. And what's interesting for me about this is when you get the entry of high-powered private enterprise into a research field that's been generally dominated by government and by academia, the suggestion is that there is a solution in the near future. Business doesn't like to wait that long for its return, and I hope that Dr. Merriman can shed some light on that. Welcome. All right.
Thank you. Hope the microphone's working. And towards the end of the talk, I'll say something about what human longevity is doing, but I would say the point is to really deliver on all this stuff in the near term. And not just stem cells, but really the whole promise of what you would call precision medicine. But right now, I want to tell you about stem cells and some interesting things about them and how they might play a major part in actually delaying aging. And let's see here. That works. But like many people, I want to start philosophically, not because I'm a philosopher, but because I'm interested in how people have come to know things over the ages. Because the ancients were not stupid. They're as smart as we are. But they didn't have all the tools necessary, but they could have correct conceptions. And so when you think of an alchemist, most people think that's turning lead into gold. But alchemy was actually a very broad and deep philosophy of nature. And the alchemists believed there was a substance distributed through all things. It was present everywhere. It was called the philosopher's stone. It was not a rock like in Indiana Jones. It's a substance distributed through all things that if you could isolate it and concentrate it, that it could restore things to their perfect state. And they believed the perfect state of metals was gold, and that's why we're trying to turn lead into gold. They believed the perfect state of all glassy materials was diamond, and so a goal of the alchemists was to turn glass into diamond. And they believed the perfect state of living matter was immortality, and so they were trying to make living things immortal. And so they were looking for a substance distributed through living matter that if isolated and concentrated and re-administered would make it immortal. And I would argue that stem cells might be the thing they were looking for. So before I talk about stem cells, let's just talk about the cell for a minute. So I just want to impress upon you how amazing the cell is. You've all had biology, but you probably didn't all see this picture here, which is a laser point a little weak. But that is an actual direct simulation of a cell in all its complexity with all the proteins in place. And the point is, a cell has tens of thousands of proteins in it that are doing all sorts of complicated jumbling at a very fast speed. And that's how complex they really are. Just the cell itself is a miracle. And an important point to remember is what the cell does is largely defined by the proteins in it. It's this big bag of tens of thousands of proteins, but what's in that bag determines what the cell does. And you can think of it a bit like an artist's palette. The artist carries on his palette his repertoire that he can make pictures and color with. And the proteins are sort of the palette of the cell, and let it do its sort of cellular artwork. And for example, pain, is a construct of our cells. That's ultimately traces back to all the proteins being present in the cells in the right way. And so just keep that in mind, but let's really talk about stem cells. And they're miracle number one. So stem cells are defined by two critical properties. I point for a brief moment. One is they can replicate and replenish themselves. They can maintain a pool of themselves, and that's very important. And the other, which is more miraculous, is that they can turn into the sort of cells that are very specialized in the body, like a neuron or a heart cell or a cell in your eye. So these more primordial cells not only can maintain a population of themselves, they can turn into these amazing cells that are, again, defined by the bag of proteins that they are. And so those two properties are what makes a stem cell a stem cell. Now, here's how stem cells make you. Again, biology lends itself to incredibly complicated diagrams, so don't look at it. But The point is, stem cells, starting from when you were an egg in your mom and an embryo, those are all stem cells at work. And it goes through this incredibly complex set of lineages to produce you. It produces your solid organs, all come through a process of stem cell replication and differentiation. It produces your tissues, your fat tissues, your connective tissues, your cartilage. And it produces our liquid organs, which are our blood and our lymph. Okay. And so stem cells create you in entirety, and they leave inside of us not so much the embryonic stem cells, they're lost, but they do leave these stem cells that cannot produce everything in you, but actually have a lot of ability to produce functional cells. And so throughout our bodies, probably roughly 1% of our cells still in us are stem cells that reside in our organs and tissues to help replenish them when they need more cells. And that leads to a lot of ideas. Once you know that this is going on, that all our organs and tissues came from a primordial cell that differentiated, and we still have those cells around and available to us, it doesn't take Einstein to start thinking up ways to repair and heal the human body. So here's just a very simplistic picture of the ideas of stem cell therapy. There's a couple of big branches. One, whoops, not the branch I wanted. It's a couple of big branches. One is I can model you in a dish, okay? So like, suppose you have epilepsy. Well, I can't just go digging around in your brain and see what drugs you should take. But if I had your neurons growing in a dish, I could start putting drugs on them and see which ones would quiet them. Well, you probably don't want that done either. But if I could get a stem cell from somewhere in your body and differentiate it into neural tissue in a dish, I can start screening for epilepsy drugs. And this is not science fiction. I helped found a company that does that. It is fascinating and sort of works. So that's one thing. There's a big world of disease in a dish stuff. More to the point of today are using stem cells to somehow repair your tissues. And this can be done in various ways. I could try and grow a new organ and put it into you, and there's a lot of people trying to do that. It's really hard to grow organs outside of the normal genesis process. Or I could try and add some stem cells at key places and hope they repopulate some cells that are missing. Like if you have diabetes and can no longer produce insulin, you have a small population of insulin-producing cells. If I get some stem cells in there, maybe they could regrow that population. So those are called sort of stem cell transplants. And that's where a lot of the stem cell research is focused on. And a lot of the hope. I mean, it certainly gives you the hope that you can regenerate organs, regenerate tissues. Let's go here. So one other miraculous thing about stem cells is they have a homing property. And they basically can go to where they're needed. They can go to where there's damage. And this is, frankly, a miracle. But, whoops, not that way. Not so good at mechanical devices. But this is an experiment done where they took a mouse, and as they're prone to do with mice, they damaged it. They did some damage to its leg, and then they infused into it some stem cells. And these stem cells were dyed green so they could be visualized, okay? They're fundamentally green. And they watched the mouse over time and visualizing where the stem cells go, because they're green and the mouse is not green. And as you see, by the end of it, 6 weeks, all the stem cells had concentrated where the injury was, and presumably they're there helping repair the tissue. And they do this with no emotional involvement. They just know where to go. So this is a nice miracle. And this is part of the tremendous promise of stem cell therapy. You know, things that Dr. Cantor spoke of required tremendous human ingenuity to work out. Here, they're almost magical. They go there, they fix stuff. That's what you want. And I could talk about other things. Anyone who's ever been pregnant gets an interesting dose of stem cells from the fetus. And there's actual strong proof that stem cells the mother gets from the fetus actually go around repairing stuff in the mother. And in fact, if any of you have a cesarean, you have remnant cells from your fetus that help repair the incision from the cesarean section. So, you say, well, that's science fiction cool. The idea we're going to be transplanting stem cells all over the place. I can't wait. Well, it's actually a completely well-established thing. and I'm going to tell you something you may not have known, but a bone marrow transplant is a stem cell transplant. And not the way you thought. I think if you hadn't thought about it, you would think, here's how bone marrow transplant works. I have defective bone marrow, maybe I have leukemia, okay? You're going to kill it and remove it, so you can radiate me, you can kill my bone marrow. And then you go to someone, you stick a big needle in their bone, and you pull out their marrow, then you come over to me, and you put that needle into my bone and inject the marrow. That's not how a bone marrow transplant works. The first part is, you do radiate me and kill all my bone marrow. You do stick a big needle in some unfortunate donor and pull out their bone marrow. But to me, you give me an infusion, IV bag in a vein. The stem cells go in my blood, and they will home to my bone and repopulate it. So that's already stem cell transplantation in this fantastic form of using the homing and using all the properties of the stem cell to heal. And this has been going on for 50 years. And there's several million people that have had this procedure, and it just works. So this is not really science fiction. This is proven, and it's really a question of how far does this go? So let's take it further. Since stem cells can home to bone, how about healing osteoporosis? And so this is a very interesting experiment, which was to study an experimental osteoporosis treatment in mice. So mice get osteoporosis, and their little tiny bones get very brittle. And so here's a young bone in a mouse, femur, and here's an old mouse. They get osteoporosis just like we do. Most of the bone is gone. And so they did the same thing. They put stem cells in the mouse, and the stem cells home to the bone, and it worked exactly like they thought. They actually didn't do the stem cell infusion until the mouse was like my age, 50, in mouse years, but it actually prevented the osteoporosis. And so, wow, that's fantastic and very cool. So this is all working. Now, an interesting thing happened on the way to the cure to osteoporosis, which is these mice lived 30% longer. So you started out trying to cure osteoporosis, and you sort of did. You cured death at the same time. So this is like a eureka moment, and this was published about 3 years ago. Eureka, we've cured aging when we thought we were just curing osteoporosis. These mice lived 30% longer and were fundamentally rejuvenated. And so this is the paper which came out. And so this strongly suggests that a true stem cell rejuvenation could be possible, where I simply infuse stem cells into you, and they go and do their business all over your whole body, and it actually regenerates the whole of you. And that would be the hope. And as Charles said, mice are not people. So never assume that something that works in a mouse will work in a person. But actually, this has already been tried in people unintentionally. Remember those bone marrow transplants I talked about? They've shown, since it's been 50 years of bone marrow transplants, people who got their bone marrow donation from a young donor, say 10 or 20 years old, lived longer than people who got their donation from an old donor. So to the extent that the young stem cells are maybe more vibrant, that transferred longevity to the human recipient. And so this leads to a whole additional theory of aging, which is that aging could be in large part what you would call a stem cell exhaustion disease. We're exhausting our repositories of stem cells. And it could be in pure numbers, like your gas tank going empty, or it could be they're still there, but they're getting weak and frail somehow. They're aging themselves somehow. And it's probably both things going on. But the idea that is one of the fundamental things, or perhaps the key critical place to intervene, is try and replenish your reserves of stem cells. And again, this just points out that indeed, people are trying to study this. It does look like your stem cells are getting old, unfortunately. Even though they're still stemmy and they still reproduce and so forth, they're losing that ability. So your stem cells are probably aging, unfortunately. And basically, as the stem cells age in you, all sorts of bad things happen. You don't have enough to replace damaged tissue. The replacement process becomes flawed and maybe makes scar-type tissue instead of fully functional tissue. And maybe the stem cell itself, gets mutated and becomes a cancer. And so the flaws in these stem cells as they age are probably also further contributing to everything we call age-related disease. So here's the solution then. It's just fill me up. The sort of things we've done, we just need to generalize them a little bit. We should all be just getting stem cell infusions, right? Probably, maybe it'd be better if they were from younger people, but regardless, some stem cell infusions could be a good thing, and we just fill up our tank. So this is a pretty simple idea, and I'm a big believer in Einstein's sayings. We should make things as simple as possible, but no simpler, right? Hope this may be too simple, but if it's not, it's great. So, you want your stem cell therapy, right? And why can't I just have it? The idea is simple enough. And can you just have it? So where to get this process? Well, first let's ask a couple questions. Where to get the stem cells themselves? Because I'm going to give you an infusion. Where are they coming from? We got a couple choices. As an adult, you have two easily accessible sets of stem cells. The ones in your bone marrow, slightly painful, but they're there. And the ones in your fat, even much more accessible, and some people actually like the idea of taking fat out. So you can get adult stem cells, as they're called, by these two processes. And you could reinfuse them. The question is, though, are they old? And I think the evidence is they probably are old if you're old like me. Probably 50 is about the inflection point. So unfortunately, I think you need to get to the doctor and get some taken out right now and frozen. But that's the problem with this, is they may be old, and that may reduce the effectiveness of this. Does it mean this therapy would not work at all to reinfuse them? No, it actually doesn't mean that. We just don't know, and it'd probably be better if they were young. So where can we get the young stem cells? Well, a couple choices. Cord blood is a classic thing. People bank their kids' cord blood, stem cells, blood stem cells. And so if you were banked, like at Life Bank USA is a huge stem cell bank company, if you're banked, great. You could get your stem cells from when you were born and reinfuse them in yourself. If you weren't banked, then you probably need a time machine to go back and get them. And so any solution that comes out, first build a time machine, not the best solution. But, so those are not as good. But there are also stem cells in the placenta, okay? And you say, well, geez, I can't go get my placenta either. If I'm there getting my placenta, I'll get the cord blood. But the thing about placental cells that is magical is they do not have the immunogenic properties. If I put someone else's placenta cells in you, they don't induce immune attack. They don't have rejection issues, something about being the placenta. So they're actually more suitable to take the placenta from someone and use those cells in many people. And also, placental cells grow more robustly and so forth. It's an element of manufacturability. You could take placentas, you could grow up the cells from them and industrialize and use these in many people. So placental cells would be a better place to get young stem cells. But you may want to bank your kids' stem cells. And so where to go get the therapy now? We know where to get the cells. Where to get these therapies? Well, or is it even possible? Well, if you go online, it's not hard to find many stem cell products there for you. For some reason, they're very fond of plant stem cells, and I don't see how that's going to work, okay? But if you need peach stem cells or rose stem cells, they're all there. I don't have a good feeling about that. I also don't have a good feeling about the stem cell clinic in China that has a testimonial that says my lifespan was extended by stem cells. I think a random Chinese stem cell clinic also not a good idea. So, but nonetheless, you could do this. A clinic could certainly take your fat, take out the stem cells, reinfuse them, and people probably do that. It's just the people doing it are probably not very expert at these matters. Are there any credible places to get this done? The company I work at is not one, because we have a very high standard, and we're not just doing this stuff on people. We're trying to really take it through FDA approvals and so forth. But there are clinics run by people who I would say are credible scientists in the stem cell field, who are forming clinics. They're always in other countries, because in the US you can't legally do a lot of these things. They do it because they think this will help people, and they're real scientists, but they really want to see if they can help people. So there are a small fraction of clinics that I would say are reputable enough. There's one called Metastem, there's one called Geostar. I know the founders. They're serious, seemingly sincere. Do I vouch for what they do? No, because I think this is all very experimental as to how effective this is, because they all use your own stem cells. They're not getting young stem cells. They're taking yours and putting them back in. And, GeoStar has a fine clinic in India. It's a bit of a trip, but you can go to their clinic in India and they do this. And they try to treat many diseases. Aging is not their focus, but they've been experimenting with sort of age reversal therapies. And for what it's worth, they think they see effects. And so do I vouch for it? Not exactly. Would I get that sort of therapy if the money and inconvenience were not a problem? I honestly probably would. Our company, message from our sponsor, is, as was indicated, founded by Craig Venter, and it's trying to do this stuff, but in a much more holistic way. We're not just a stem cell company. We are a precision medicine company. So we got the whole genome. We got complete biomedical workup with you with every conceivable technology. And then to get the therapy, we are indeed developing stem cell therapies, both for aging and for cancer. We're very hard at work developing cellular cancer therapies as well. And so, Craig Venter, for those who don't know him, has had success in the past. He sequenced the first human genome. He made the first artificial life form. So if anyone can bring this home, I think he's a good one. And he brings home the money, which is a very important thing. As Charles said, you can only do so much on a few tens of millions. We have a few hundreds of millions to do these things. And so how to delay aging, and this is my last comment. So I would say just say no to drugs, like rapamycin, which is mold from the heads on Easter Island. Say no to starvation, which is caloric restriction. Say no to young blood. There's been a lot of recent work on putting young blood into old people. Let's just not go all vampire on this stuff. And I would say stem cell infusion is the most promising thing, especially young stem cells, especially placental stem cells. But this all needs to be worked up. And anything that creates mortality is always a double-edged sword with cancer. And there's a whole interesting other story about our stem cells, a reservoir for breeding cancer. They're already replicative, which is sort of cancer-like. It doesn't take as much to go wrong for them to become cancerous. If I start giving you all sorts of stem cell infusions, am I going to up your risk of cancer? To be determined. But as for the elixir of life, I think if the alchemist has any end to his quest, it would be that he was looking for a suspension of adult stem cells, perhaps, which coming near you.
Doctor, are you familiar with the case of Gordie Howe?
Yes.
So he suffered a stroke, was reputed to be near death, went down to Mexico, some clinic. Mexico is known for...
Yes, exactly.
Yes, experimental, sometimes dodgy, people desperate take that trip. Mm-hmm. But the story I've heard is 9 hours after receiving a stem cell injection, he was back on his feet.
And I'm a little suspicious about the time frame, because if you saw in our little mouse subject, it took a few days for the stem cells to truly get homed in. But, I think when it comes down to it, it's just you can't really say no. The potential is there, and if at the end of the day he's better, to me it just says, fantastic, we need to move this into real clinical trials. And that's what we're doing at Human Longevity. Trials in animals, designing human clinical trials, and we're going to take it that way. But I wouldn't say that it didn't work.
Splendid, thank you.
Let's see if this works.